Welcome, everybody, to UFO Man Live. My name is Tim, or UFO Man, and tonight we have a special guest returning to our show for the third time. His name is DERREL SIMS, and he is known as the Alien Hunter. But first, before we go any farther into our discussion, we have a clip that he has submitted for us to play, and here it is. Well done video there, DERREL. Really appreciated you sending that to us.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. You have got some wonderful people there, Sarah and Polly, and you, Tim. I'm delighted to be here.
I'm glad you're here too. Thank you for the compliment. We really appreciate it. In regards to tonight, I do have a first question for you. Can you do a recap, kind of, on how you got involved with the UFO alien phenomenon in the first place, for the people in chat and people who are watching online that don't really know who you are?
Sure. The how I personally got involved, I was a captive audience at age 4, and I lived in Midland, Texas in 1952, and that's kind of dates me a little bit. That's not long before that they made dirt, and I told them it was the wrong color, so we had to change it. So I'm pretty old. But the fact is, age 4, I was lying in bed, and it's in wintertime, very cold, and I noticed this being standing in my room, which didn't make any sense to me. Back then, we didn't have movies of aliens and things like that. Nobody knew anything about that. And I couldn't figure out why he was there, and he didn't have any clothes on. I mean, kids see things differently than adults. So basically, I said, I started looking at him, and I started from the head up because he had these big black eyes, and I looked at him, and his eyes were just overwhelming. And he had no nose to speak of, and no ears, and a big bulbous head, and perfectly round black eyes, about the size of a big silver dollar. And as I kept looking down, I realized he didn't have any clothes on. It was wintertime. I'm freezing in my bed with a quilt. And as I look down at his chest, I realized he doesn't have any nipples. And then I really stunned. I noticed he didn't have a belly button. And then, as kids do, someone stand there without any clothes on, they're going to say, "Look, he didn't have a TT," and he didn't have any genitalia. And so it took me years to. I thought that all that was weird, but it took me years to figure out. As I grew up and started studying the phenomena, if you don't have a belly button, you weren't born. And if you don't have genitalia, you don't procreate. You didn't get here the way we do. So there's a good possibility he was made, hatched, cloned, or manufactured.
Yeah. The fact that you saw a white alien versus a gray, which everybody seems to encounter, it seems kind of rare that you saw a white one.
Yeah, that's true. It also has to do sometimes with lighting, because a lot of times when people say they see a gray, if you question them at great length about it, they'll often change their mind and say, "Well, he's more of a tanned color, like kind of an off gray, more like a tan." So they vary differently in that respect. But the most important thing about my event at age 4 was he realized that I was not doing what I was supposed to do. I mean, I'm supposed to be scared or in awe or whatever. And something happened in that event that I carried that skill with me from then on. And what happened, it allowed me to spy on him and what he was doing. And how I learned how to do that, I have no idea. I wished I did know. But my point is, it's like when a president is like a case in point on TV. President Barack Obama was on TV talking to the Russian to Putin, and he told him, said, "Don't worry about that. I'll fix that when I get reelected." And the mic was on, and everybody heard it. It's called a hot mic. And what happened in my event, it was like I was hot micing the alien, because I could hear him talking to someone else in the room. When he was talking to me, he was trying to make it so that only I could hear his conversation mentally between the two of us. But I was hearing the conversation. He kept saying, "It's awake," and I realized he's not talking about someone else, talking about me. And the problem is they're going to have to make me forget or not be aware and that sort of thing. This was very common back in the 50s and 60s. They didn't want you to remember anything.
It's kind of you woke up before time.
Well, I literally could overhear him talking, communicating to the others in the room. Now, the reason that's significant for your audience is I've done that for the next 13 years in my abductions. They ended at age 17. I was able to turn that on and off whenever I was abducted. I would be able to hear what they were saying. In other words, let me give you a quick example. Some people come back from their events and they're horrified because they were abducted, taken without their will. Others come back and say, "I love it because I feel like they chose me and I'm special, I'm unique," and whatever whopper they wanted to tell you that you buy into. And the important thing is, it didn't matter which side of the fence you're on, I got to hear what they were really talking about with each other, which is not anything like what they talked to us about. So this was terribly important for all of my research. So when people tell me, they say, "Why do you think you know so much about the UFO phenomenon, these aliens and all that?" I said, because I've listened to them. It's like if It's like somebody plugged in a tape recorder at your house and listened to all your private conversations. That's what happened. They
Yeah.
didn't know I was listening, so I kept it quiet.
It's
Oh,
very interesting what you're saying about the fact that you didn't recognize any genitals or the belly, it tells us kind of a lot about their lack of reproduction, and that maybe they don't come from wombs, but maybe just artificially made, some of them, right?
I agree with that. That's a reasonable assessment based on actual eyewitness evidence. And when we consider that, as an investigator, I growing up and everything, and much older now, and been all over the world, literally, from Japan to Israel to you name it.
Next time, come and visit me.
Well, I'll have to. Next time you have to.
Yeah.
We'll have to make it work. I was in
Yeah.
Jerusalem. I went to Netanya, Haifa,
Oh,
Beth Shemesh, the place where David slew Goliath, the giant.
oh,
And
yeah. Well, next
anyway,
time, let me know.
yeah,
We will meet
be a
for
lot of
sure.
fun. Be a lot of fun.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, it's amazing about when you talk about reproduction and how they were made. It also makes me think about the hybridization programs, when they cannot reproduce by themselves.
Well, the issue to me is, well, I studied other alien. At age 3, excuse me, in third grade, I got abducted again in Mayhill, New Mexico, where I moved, where my dad went to work there, and I got abducted that night by the gray, the same gray type alien, the white guy, took me, but he took me to someone different this time. He took me to a praying mantis that was quite large, and I had no idea what in the world that was all about. The next morning, that was on a Friday night after school, and I didn't get a handle on what had really gone on in that abduction until the next day. I was out playing in a field it's out in the mountains, and in the summertime now, and I love insects and I love animals of all kinds. We rescued animals all our life. Even on my business card, you see a tiger there. That was our tiger. I rescued him out of an apartment complex, believe it or not, in Houston, Texas. But my point is that I was pulling the heads off these little grasshoppers, killing them, hundreds of them. And I thought, well, why am I doing that? That doesn't make any sense. I love insects. I love animals. Why am I pulling the heads off these insects? And I put one of them up my face very close and looked at him. And I realized that's the wrong insect. I was thinking that these were praying mantises, but they weren't. They were grasshoppers.
Oh,
But the face is similar. It was the praying mantis that I was so upset about.
yeah.
That was the one that got me that night.
When I was a kid, I was very fascinated by praying mantises, and I kept a whole bunch in jars whenever I'd catch them when I was just out. I would just walk around with praying mantises all over me. I have no idea why. For a certain period of time when I was a kid, I couldn't get enough of praying mantises.
Right. Well, I have a thesis about the alien in general, not just the gray, as we often talk about, but a PhD was on one night with me on a podcast, and he was telling me all this different stuff. And I said, wait a minute, you want me to interview you, or do you want to interview me? He said, what do you mean? I said, well, you keep telling me all the answers, and I haven't even answered it yet. He said, well, no, tell me what you think. I said, okay. I said, the alien, in my opinion, the 7 primary flavors we see: the praying mantis, the small gray, the larger gray, the reptile, the humanoid, the Nordic, so to speak, and Bigfoot. I said, all of these are part of the same program. He said, what are you talking about? I said, what you're not listening to. That's what I'm talking about. I said, you need to open your mind a little bit here and think and ask yourself some real hard questions. He said, okay. And I said, for instance, where do you suppose you get praying mantis DNA? Probably not from Mars, probably not from Venus. Hey, wait a minute. We've got several hundred species of praying mantises right here on this planet.
Yeah.
I said, where do you think that you would get Nordic DNA? So I'm going to take a wild guess here. Norway?
Right.
He got quiet. And I said, when you look at the Bigfoot, everybody said, well, he's an interdimensional. I said, I get all that. I've been through all that. That's what you don't understand is that Bigfoot, that when they did the DNA study on it, Dr. Melvin Ketchum and down here in Texas, actually, in Nacogdoches area, she found that because some friend of mine asked me to donate a bunch of the DNA I had from Bigfoot, and I offered it to them, and they said we already have enough. I said, okay, good, that's fine with me. And the point that I'm getting at is that they had sufficient, and what they found was that Bigfoot was obviously an ape-like creature, clearly. The second thing they found was that he had modern human woman DNA. Mitochondrial DNA was human woman. So I said, the question is, how do you get a Bigfoot ape and a mitochondrial DNA from a modern human woman? How does that work? I said, that's called a transgenic. It's a mixing of two species together, and it's fascinating. That's my point is that all this, I said, there's so much subterfuge in the UFO community because they won't ask questions. They just make up answers, so to speak. And so I said, I'm with my buddy who's a Native American medicine man, and we're driving around in Washington State, going to a conference. And I said, tell me where the gray alien comes from. And he spoke like they always does on TV. He says, well, they come from there, the star people. They come from the stars. And I said, don't talk to me like I'm white. I said, I am NAUA blood. I said, I'm native blood just like you. Don't talk to me like some white guy don't have a clue. He said, oh, they come from inside the earth. And I said, why didn't you say that to begin with? He said, yeah, but the white people want to hear about they came from the stars. I said, I know what they want to hear. I said, but you're talking to me now. Anyway, I said, the stupid thing is, I said, because you're native, I said, and you wear native clothing and you look more native than I do, I said, people assume that everything you say, everything comes out of your mouth is 100% truth. I said, they don't have a clue whether you know or not. I said, and in fact, in my opinion, a lot of things you don't know. And I said, I won't tell anybody that because we don't want to get anybody in trouble here. We're just, we're buddies, we're friends. And anyway, the point is that these beings are all the DNA for the most part comes from planet Earth. Somebody came here, not the alien, but someone else, took the DNA from this planet and made, hatched, cloned, or manufactured these different entities to make us believe that they're aliens from another planet. And the fact is their DNA is from here. They don't even know where they're from. If you ask them, they say, I'm from Zeta Reticuli. They don't even know where Zeta Reticuli is. Right. They probably never been anywhere outside this solar system. My point is that if we don't ask critical questions and look for really critical, good answers, we're going to be, like I told MUFON the same thing. I said, I think you guys are so far behind. I said it'd be another 100 years before you finally figure out that that these guys they're not even alien. And they said, what do you mean? I said, well, back in the 90s, you were having a problem trying to believe that the abductions were even real. I said, I remember, you got to understand, I'm older than you guys are. I remember this. You guys didn't even believe abductions were real. Now you defend it to the hilt. I said, that's how far you are behind. I said, it's now 20 years later, you're just now getting around to, well, we need to look at some of the craft, and you think they're a bunch of nuts and bolts, and some of them are. Others may not be. I said, my point is that if you don't ask critical questions and question yourself and the evidence that you're looking at, you can't look at some things and say, well, that's all there is to it. We're looking at all there is. That's you're being short-sighted. I said, and I'll give you one quick example, and I'll shut up. I said, if they say, well, they're here checking our DNA out, trying to upgrade our DNA. I said, that's just, you've been watching too much Star Trek. I said, you put me on a planet with half a dozen good DNA people, with a race of people there on that planet. If we get some samples, we'll be done in a couple of days, and we'll tell you everything you want to know about everybody on that planet. Now, the aliens have been here for, at least in this program called Abduction, 200 years. Not more than 200. 200 years. And they still don't know anything about your DNA. Why do I think that's not correct?
Yeah.
It's a red herring. It's a ruse. They're getting you to pay attention to that, because what they're really doing, they don't want you to know anything about. Like,
oh yeah,
like questioned, like, where do you really come from? Who are
right,
you really?
Yeah, those kind of questions. Yeah.
Mr. DERREL, I would like you to take us to this point in your childhood after you had your first experience. And how did you deal with it? Because it's a strong experience. You saw something that you never saw before. How, or did you communicate this to your parents? And afterwards, as a police officer, how did you deal with stigma? And how did you get to the your interest in the implants? So all the process.
Okay, the great question. I remembered my event very, very well, and when the alien couldn't make me, when he had no control over me, when I kept hearing what they were doing, telling the others why he can't succeed, and I'm hearing all this, so I realize I'm being played, because I'm hearing their conversation with each other and my conversation with him. So finally, he changes his image from the alien into that of a clown, a white-faced clown with bright red hair, and he got real close to my face and tried to. I jumped back away from the bed, and I pushed myself away from in my little tiny cot, and I landed, pushed the bed apart from the wall, and I fell on the wall, floor, and bounced my head off the floor. And he lifted up the covers of my bed and stuck his huge head under the bed, and he changed. Everybody says, well, he shapeshifted. I said, he didn't shapeshift. That's not the same thing. He changed my internal representations of what he wanted me to see.
Yeah.
He didn't physically. If you'd taken a photograph of him, you'd still see an alien. He wanted me to see he was a clown, and that basically I was having a bad dream and none of it happened.
Yeah.
I kept shaking my little head, no, because I wanted to remember him for the clown that he really was, not for the clown he wanted me to think he was.
Yeah.
So next morning,
definitely.
when I got up in the morning,
what's more terrifying, if a clown of the alien,
Well, many abductees have phobias of clowns, and they don't know where they come from.
Oh,
They really don't know.
there you go.
They're just
Yeah,
schemes.
I'm just not a fan of clowns, but that's about it. But I love killer clowns from outer space. Okay, so yeah, I'm all right. But
Let's The answer to the question of what happened, the next morning when I got up, my parents could see I was very, very upset. And they kept questioning me to no end about what's wrong. Did you have a bad dream? And I knew as soon as I told them that's what it was going to be, a bad dream. That's what the alien wanted it to be, a bad dream. They didn't want me to tell them the truth, and they had never believed it. So I never told my mom and dad anything. My mother passed away about 4 years ago, and she looked at me and said, I saw you on the Ancient Alien TV program, and I, of course, I knew you were an investigator, but well, they said you were an abductee. Well, that's not right. You were never abducted. I said, actually, I was.
Oh my God.
Why did you never tell us? That's because I didn't want to see that dumb-looking Boo Radley look on your face that I'm looking at now.
Amazing. I told my mother a few months ago, actually, and she was kind of in shock too, because, you know, after 40 and something years, like, what the hell are you talking about?
I gotta say this. Polly and I had kind of the same experience in regards to a large tarantula-like creature. I was 4 years old, and it was daytime, and I was coming out of my bedroom in the upstairs of our house, and I was passing my sister's bedroom doorway, and I saw inside the doorway, I saw a large spider, and I would have to estimate maybe 3.5 feet wide by about 3 feet tall. I could see hairs on its legs. I could see the shiny part on its back body, and I could see its eyes. I freaked out. I ran back to my room, and I started screaming. My mom and dad came upstairs, asked me what was wrong. I told them I saw a spider the size that was unimaginable in my sister's doorway. My parents went to the doorway. It wasn't there. It was gone.
Of course. But you won't believe this, but my wife and I were laughing the other night, and I said, "Do you remember that big tarantula that you saw in our room?" She said, "Yeah, it was about 3.5 feet. About 3.5 feet. It was a tarantula. You can see the hairs all over it." And I said, "Yeah." She said, "Well, I had to be hallucinating. It had to be." I said, "Well, it was a screen, Doris. It's a screen. It's an image. The event's already over. That's what's left. You're supposed to think it's a tarantula, a bad dream. You made it up. It doesn't exist, and there's no such thing anyway." And I said, "The fact is, the event was actually over, and you woke up."
So what does actually happen during those events? Because in my case, I was asleep and something told me, like, you need to wake up, you need to wake up. And when I woke up, I saw in front of me a huge tarantula the size of a Volkswagen car, you know, trying to grab my sister from her bed and taking her out. And I tried to scream, but I was paralyzed. I couldn't move. I could not scream. And suddenly everything stopped. So
Yes.
who is that tarantula, and how did this happen?
Well, you got 4 people involved in that event. You, your sister, the tarantula, and whoever woke you up. What if someone that woke you up was angelic?
Right.
And then what you saw with the screen memory of the alien trying to take your sister. But we actually have, on rare cases, angelic beings interfering with an abduction. The aliens can't get out of there fast enough. It's really amazing.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it was a really like this voice telling me, wake up, you need to wake up, but wake up now. Like, it was like, so I just sit on my bed and I saw this tarantula grabbing my sister. Like, I was like 5 or 6 years old.
I mean, how
was
could a tarantula, so to speak, to show you the facts that it's a screen image? How's a tarantula as big as a car going to get your sister out the door? It's bigger than the door. So what you're looking at is a screen image. It's a false memory of what they project, like the clown image he did to me. It's a false image to fool you, so they can do what they want to do without you knowing it. So if you woke up and told that to your parents, they'd never believe you. That's whether there aren't any tarantulas as big as cars in our house.
Exactly. That's what I never said nothing, because I said, what can I say to my parents? You know, and it has always been like this.
There's only one incident I never told my parents about, but I did share with Sarah. I went to bed one night and I thought I was sleeping under the blanket because I was scared of the dark. And all of a sudden I started seeing balls of yellow light floating around the room. And I'm talking about hundreds, not just one. And they were like the size of quarters, and they were floating all around the room. And I thought I had created them by rubbing the blanket together and creating friction. But that didn't work. So I don't know what they were. They didn't seem threatening, but they were in my room for 3 nights straight. And then they disappeared.
3 is a fairly rare pattern. We had a girl come here from Brazil. I met her in Brazil, and she wrote me and asked if my wife would allow her to. She was coming to the U.S. because she lived with us for a couple of weeks until she found a place to stay. And my wife said yes. And anyway, the girl came here, and it's an incredible story. It actually happened in my home. And she, one night we woke up and she was crying and early in the morning. And Doris and I went in and said, "What is the problem?" She told us about this alien that came through the wall, and she picked up a piece of firewood at the fireplace and acted like she was going to hit it. And it scared him, and he finally left. Long story short is I said, "Well, it's okay. It's over." And she kept crying. And I said, "What's the problem?" She says, "They always come in threes with me." And she said they come on the 3rd month, the third day at 3 o'clock in the morning. And I said, "So you're saying they're coming again?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, I'll be awake at 3 o'clock in the morning and we'll see who's here." And so she goes to sleep that next night. And I got to thinking, if it's going to happen 3 times, why in the world would you waste? This is a great opportunity to test something. So I said, okay. And I said, what if it's spiritual? So I prayed about it and got this incredible peace that passes all understanding that it was okay. Don't even worry about it. And so I went to sleep. I went to bed. And next morning she got up and she was crying. And she said, "You said you were going to be here." And I said, I did say that, and I didn't do it. And I'm sorry about that, but I will be there tonight. I don't care who. I said, but I prayed and I felt like everything would be perfect. And she said, "Well, I'm not crying because I'm mad. I'm crying because I'm happy." I said, "Happy for what?" And she said, "The alien came through the wall again, and I picked up a firewood," and she said, "Something worse than I could even imagine came through the wall behind him." She said, I didn't know things like that existed." Wow. And she said, I dropped the firewood. I was shaking. I was so scared. And she said, and she started crying, and she said, "Then this wonderful angel came through the wall, and the alien and that horrible creature left so fast you couldn't believe it." She said, so I thank God for whatever, all these wonderful things. And I said, well, I don't care what happens. I will be awake tonight for the third event. So third event, I'm at 2:45 in the morning. I'm sitting there next to her. She's laying on a little pallet on the floor in the living room. And she sits up in slow motion and says, and looks at me and says, she's scared. And I said, it's all right, go to sleep. I'm here. And she lays down, goes back to sleep. At 3 o'clock in the morning, I mean exactly on the minute, she sat up in slow motion and looked at me and said, they know you're here. I said, yes. Now they know that I know that they know that I know that I'm here. I said, one of these days I'm going to be on the other side of that wall, or they're going to be on this side of the wall. And I was sitting there with a Japanese sword about 4 foot tall. It had over $1,000 work done on the blade alone. And I said, and then there'll be pieces of them here with us. And I said, and they won't be bothering you anymore. Anyway, long story short, that ended that particular event. But they later, to go further into Polly's question, they came a few days later. Katja was helping me with. I was starting to write my book at that time, and she was helping me sort tons of notes I have everywhere in boxes. And I said, well, I'm going to go pick up my wife for lunch. We're going to go eat lunch. And she got real scared all of a sudden. When abductees get scared like that, something's near, something's coming, and they know it. But they don't know what it. You often don't know what it is. And she kept saying, if you go to eat with Doris, or you go somewhere else, would you please call me and tell me? I said, of course, I'll be glad to. And I left, and Doris and I are at our favorite little restaurant about 5 miles away, and we're eating. They had these big pieces of paper where they bring your food. It's beautiful, wonderful piece of sandwiches, and we're eating, having a great time. And all of a sudden, I look up at Doris and said, "Oh my God, they're in our house right now." She said, "What are you talking about?" I grabbed all of her lunch and mine on the big papers and get in the car. We ran out to the car. She opened the car. I threw all the stuff in her lap. I said, "The alien is in our house right now." And I unlocked the door and went in, and she's walking around incoherently crying. The blood's coming out of her ear and out of her left ear. And I said, "What's wrong?" And she's incoherent. This is just incredible. So finally, I told Doris that you take her into the bathroom and you check her from the bottom of her feet to the top of her head. I want to know where that blood comes from, because there were no wounds on her anywhere, but there's blood coming out of her ear. So in a nutshell, she asked me to work with her, and I finally did next day when she was real coherent and steady and everything. And what had happened, as soon as I left, she was right about somebody being there. And an alien Mib, came in through the door. He didn't open it. He didn't unlock it. He came through it. And she kept trying to look past him to see if the door was still locked. And finally she looked over and saw the bolt was still thrown. And she realized, oh my God, he's in the room with me. And he got here through the wall. So long story short, they lay her on the couch and they talk to her. And he tries to make her think that she's going with my son at the time. They later married. And so they're engaged. And he said, "We want to remove an implant from your ear." And none of us knew that she had one. And so she kept saying, no, I won't allow it. And they tried to mimic my son. They mimicked his voice. They mimicked his cologne, every detail about him, to try to get her to think, to make her comfortable with what they were going to do. Right. And finally, she said another guy showed up, real big, like the Mib, and she described him, and I laughed and I said, She said, "What's so funny?" I said, that one's not a MIB. She said, "Who is it?" I said, "He's called a human advisor." And I said, "I met him when I was 17." She wasn't even live whenever my event happened. So anyway, he told her that he said, "I will destroy David if you don't let us take this implant." And I said, "Well, maybe he was just lying about that." And she said, "No, that guy, the human advisor, said when he threatens something, he means it. Said he would have destroyed David." And so she said, "I let him take it." And that's what they do. She said, "They did something in my ear." She, at that point, two gray type aliens came in, and they removed the object from her ear, and that's where the blood came from. And anyway, the remarkable thing about that is that it appeared to be a biological implant, kind of like something as thick as as thin as a. I don't know if you've ever seen this before. Have you ever seen it's called a horsehair? A horsehair worm. They found them in water. They're harmless to us, but they kill insects. But it looked like that. It was about that long, about 6-7 inches long, and it was thicker and it was reddish. I don't know what the red had to do with the blood or what, but it was biologically, you wouldn't have found it if you had been looking for it. But they wanted that. They did not want me to find it. And of course, that's how I found out about it, because all of that came out.
Wow. Wow. Amazing.
True story. Hand to God. Hand to God. True story.
Can you talk a little bit about some of the implants that you have come across in your years of removing them, in regards to the coagulum that surrounds some of the implants, if not all, and let us know how they react. We did have a question. Can chips be activated?
Really great questions. The answer to your question, the first part, is that some of the implants are. I want to say this, and I have to do this carefully, because I don't want to offend anyone. Implants are very rare. Everybody thinks that if you've been abducted, you have an implant. That's not true. That is not true. Implants are extremely rare. I look at hundreds of x-rays every year, and we find almost no implants from abductees or contactees. Now, we have found things in them and removed them, and they weren't implants, but they thought they were. Now, just because you got abducted doesn't mean you got an implant. Just because I'm just telling you that implants are very rare. They really are. And the idea, the word chip, I hear this word a lot, and I don't use it because it doesn't get across the idea of exactly what we're talking about. Most of us don't know a lot about the alien, and we know a lot less about the implants than we do the alien, and we don't know much about the alien. We know we hear a lot, we read a lot, or we talk to people, and we assume that's all the information there is. That's it, and that information may not even be true. And as a ex-police officer, I worked with people that have been abducted, literally, and I mean literally kidnapped, and also cases where people murder cases, and it's really I kind of get in trouble when I talk about this, because some of our contactees will say, "Well, I know this and I know that, and I don't care what you're saying." You know, I said, "Oh, okay. Well, I'm nothing I want to get beat up over." But I tell them that that some of the information that we have is not accurate. And as well, they told me that, and they told me a lot of things too, but it wasn't true. And when I overheard what they were talking about with each other, I realized they've been playing me along for a long, long time. And now that I'm hearing what they're doing, For instance, whenever I got my implant when I was 12 years old, I was wide awake when the event happened, and I remember every bit of it. And I also remember them talking about what they were going to do to me that they didn't want me to know about. So I'm hearing two conversations. One when they talk to me directly, and then the other one is where I'm listening to them hot mic'd, and I'm listening to what they're really saying. What they said among themselves was vastly different than what they told me. And so the idea of a chip is not an accurate statement. They don't put chips in people. If a chip, so to speak, gets put in somebody, it's probably due to an intelligence community or someone else doing that.
Like this right here.
Yeah, an RFID chip only has a range of about 5 feet. I mean, you can take a scanner and find out all kinds of. We put those in our cats and dogs and.
An alien can find you anywhere. They wouldn't need something like that.
Thank you. That the alien, it is not a tracking device. As Stanton Friedman told me one time, they were asking Stanton on a radio, and he and I were on a radio station, and he said, "Stanton, what are these alien implants?" He said, "I have no idea." He said, "Ask DERREL. He's the one that knows." He said, "I think they may be a transponder or something." I said, "They're not transponders, and they're not tracking devices." Well, what are they? I said, well, it depends on how you're approached. It depends on what part did they touch first. How did they approach you? That's why it's important for me to work with someone to find out exactly what happened. In other words, if you're sitting there telling me, oh, this clown-like creature was inside my room and did something in my nose, so therefore that's what really happened. You don't know what really happened. All you remember is the screen memory,
right?
Not the real memory. It's Memorex versus real memory versus Memorex is what I call it. Memorex is what they want you to think, and they can come up with some beautiful, amazing stories. I mean, wonderful stuff. But the truth is,
but if implants, alien implants are rare, why those that were implanted were I don't like the word chosen, but why those specific people were implanted and others are not? And can be these implants, sometimes I feel it can be kind of a catalog, not for tracking us, because obviously they know where we are.
They knew where you are.
Maybe they kind of make a catalog of who we are genetically talking as families. Maybe, for example, in my case, if I had a cube implant, maybe all the ones that we have a cube implant are related by some kind of, I don't know if it's the same species that are dealing with us or the same medical stuff. Maybe it's a kind of catalog for them. So why those people are implanted, and what is the goal of the implant?
Well, the fact is there are different types of implants. A lot of people don't know this, but one guy wrote a book and they actually said all the implants are on the left side of the body. And I told the doctor, I said, why did you say that? He said, because you told me the implants are on the left side of the body. So I said, you wrote a book and said all that? And he said, yeah. I said, I told you not to print this stuff. You don't know what you're talking about. And he said, what do you mean? I said, I didn't show you the ones on the right side. I didn't show you the ones in the middle. I didn't show you the ones in the hands or the feet.
Right.
I didn't show them to you because I was thinking you would do something stupid like write a book, and you did. Now you've written all this stuff. Now, every time I go on these programs, people say, well, my implant's on the left side of the body, so I know it's alien. I really know all of that. The guy he didn't have a clue. He wrote that stuff down. Oh my God. And I have to be real careful because they get real offended and real upset if I try to correct that. But we have got implanted objects. I've conducted 27 surgical interventions from India to the United States, and we're ready to do some in Brazil now too. But my point is that some of the implants are biologic, some are metal, some are ferrous metal, some are not ferrous metal.
What
Some of the
about this one? I thought maybe this might be meteorite.
Well, it might be. You have to examine it to see. But the first ones that we removed from two people, well, three of them were in a woman and one in her foot, and one of them was in the man's hand. And these two people were very, very closely related in their UFO event, so to speak. He kept having dreams of this mathematical configuration of these Moebius strip. You know what a Moebius strip is? It's when you take a little piece of paper, it's a strip of paper, and make a little chain out of it. But instead of chaining it, you turn it one link, and then you've got a figure eight, and it's literally only has one side at that point. Well, he kept seeing three of these intertwined in his dreams, and there's a reason I'm telling you this. The woman, on the other hand, inside the UFO, she saw. Now, he wasn't anywhere near this event. They never were involved. They're never in the same events. She was seeing three giant tubes about as big around as a bowling ball, 18 feet tall, and three of them, and they looked like giant Moab strips, and a bowling ball-like device was roaming through them, making this wonderful noise. So she saw those three things, but he saw the same thing, but from a mathematical point of view. He's more of a scientist mind. Now, the reason I say that is because this will blow you away. I'm telling you, I just found this out just a couple of years ago. Let me see, I wrote it down here for you tonight. The guy, his name is Pat Parnello. He kept having this dream. He would call me up in the middle of the night or send me emails telling me about this really bizarre stuff about these the three Moebius strips and how they intertwine and they create enormous power. And it went on and on and on and on. And I thought, well, why does he keep telling me all this stuff? And later, I found out this year, of all things, Pat Parnello was contacted by the intelligence community. Can you believe this? An abductee. And they wanted to, we didn't find this out until just recently. Now, the reason this is amazing is because the intelligence community picked him up and actually took him to a secret location, and they wanted to test his theory on these three Moebius strips. And the best way to describe this, they took the mechanics, the mathematics of the mechanics he's talking about. They took that and they put it in something we think was a rail gun. A rail gun is it's a specialty weapon that it's highly classified. You're not going to know anything about it. You don't get to see those. We're not going to get to play with them in the military, like when I was there. Well, anyway, they tested this thing. They constructed the mathematics of this thing with his design, with this rail gun. Like we call it a rail gun because we don't technically know what it was. We think that's what it was, and to our shock and amazement, it fired a bolt-like bullet out of it and it went through the entire concrete wall of the secret building, and they tracked the bullet, so to speak. Guess how far away it was?
How far?
35 miles.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
So just because somebody's an abductee doesn't mean they don't know what they're talking about. It doesn't mean they're crazy.
Right.
So the intelligence community were very interested in him and in the things that he could prove, so to speak. It's one thing to tell people stuff. It's another thing to literally show it. But that thing, that bullet was 35 miles away when they finally found it.
That's incredible.
So what is the purpose of those implants actually?
Implants for different reasons. The physical, okay, I'm going to say something that's probably going to get me in a little trouble here. Physical implants are not really the most important thing. Mental implants are far more important. They're called apps. I call them the alien apps. I wrote a book about it. I haven't published it yet, but I'm going to give you an example. When I was in Birmingham with my wife this last year at a huge conference, this father brought his daughter, about 16-year-old daughter, up to me to talk to me, and he says, "I need for you to help her out here. She needs some help." And I said, "Okay." And I said, and so I questioned her, and she was very reticent to talk. So what I started doing is started telling her a lot about her events, and she was stunned. "How do you know that?" That's because I'm one of you. I said, "There's nothing happened to you that I don't know about." And anyway, she started talking then, and her dad kept telling her, you're talking to a world-class investigator in person. You're never going to get this chance again. Do it. And so finally she started talking to me, and I said, she mentioned that she thought it was an implant. And I said, "Okay, where?" And she told me where, and I said, "Okay, which nostril?" And she said, "Do you know anything about that?" And I said, "I got one when I was 12. I said, and the fact is, I said, if you have one there, and I said, very few people have these, but those that do, I said, they're there for different reasons. But in a nutshell, I said, the important, and this is really important, I said, what I want you to do for me, I said, are you going to help me with this investigation? She said, yes. She said, yes. And I looked at her father. I said, "You're going to make sure she helps. She follows up on that." He said, "Sure." And I said, "What I want you to do, young lady, I want you to go down tomorrow or tonight if you can and get an x-ray of that and bring it back to me tomorrow." And she looks at me. Now, we're like best friends, right? She looks at me and says, "No." I said, "Why would you?" And
Mental
her dad
programming.
says, why are you saying no?" I said, "You have to." I said, "This is what I'm trying to point out to you, sir. That physical implant's one thing." I said, "But the app that's in her it's a control device. It's an app, and that particular app, it is designed to make you ignore, hide, or destroy your own evidence. She's not going to get an X-ray, and she won't. And you can't make her do it." He said, "But she just said she wanted help." And I said, "It doesn't matter how much help she wants. If that app's installed in her and it's that powerful to her, then she's not going to do it." I said, "Another app that's installed in people." And when I go to UFO groups, I'll ask the question, "How many of you people got abducted?" They'll raise their hands. "How many people contacted you?" They'll raise their hands. "How many abductees?" They'll raise their hands. "How many people think you have an implant?" About half of them will raise their hands. And I said, "Okay, how many of you will go down and get an x-ray for me tomorrow?" All the hands will go down. Why do you think that is? That's an app. That is an implant. They are instructed and told, and they most people will not violate that app.
So that's an invisible implant.
They're invisible. They're mental, and they are effective. They're real. I know they are. I've got one myself.
Yeah, a few weeks ago, I woke up and in my nostril, in the upper part was like, must have been some sort of puncture wound, right? That I got in my sleep again. Anyways, and it just kept, like bleeding. There was always blood around it. It was very sore. Like I had pierced my nose once before, so it felt like that, right? Anyways, and it was like that for like 2 weeks, just painful, and it wouldn't stop like bleeding, right? And then I just woke up, one day, and it was all gone. There's no blood there. There's no problems. Doesn't hurt anymore. It's like it never happened. It was the weirdest thing. But for like 2 weeks there, man, it hurt. It bothered me. I was getting a lot more headaches than I normally get. It wasn't a good deal.
She said
I
that
don't
it
know what
felt like
happened.
she was stabbed up her nostril.
Yeah, it felt like I got stabbed.
Well, in my case, when I was 12 years old, I didn't wake up. It was like I was switched on. I didn't wake up. I was switched on, and I heard my mother's voice. Now you got to realize my mom and dad live in the other end of the house, and the doors are shut. If they were yelling, I couldn't hear them. I could hear my mother's voice as clear as anything in the world, saying, "Darrell, go outside and look at. There's a new star in the Pentine." I knew what the Pentine was, and there's no such thing as a Pentine. There's no star system or anything, but I knew instantly what it was. I walked outside in my little T-shirt, and my little underwear, and I see this huge bright light. I'm in New Mexico, Alamogordo, New Mexico, Holloman Air Force Base, and White Sands, all that's out there. And I kept looking at this beautiful bright light. It's getting brighter and brighter. And I realized it's not a star. It's on the horizon. It's coming toward us. And next thing I know, I'm inside a round room, lying on I call it the slab, on a hard table, with my feet elevated about 11 degrees. And now and the different aliens are in the room, and they're telling me, it won't hurt. It won't, all these lies. It won't hurt. You won't feel anything. It's okay. It's for your good and all that. But I'm hearing them talk to each other, and that's not what they're saying at all. So when people tell me, well, when the alien tells you something that's real, no, I don't believe that at all. It's like listening to the mafia.
Darrell, can you say what they were saying?
I never have, and the reason I don't is because, this actually happened one time. I had a guy, after I told the same story, he wrote me, and he said, I had the same thing happen to me in 1960. And I said, well, you could have heard that from me on the radio show, and the same, you could have made the whole thing up. He said, no, I have an X-ray of it. Send it to me. And he did. And it's dated in 1960. He got an implant in the exact same location I did. The guy lived in Florida. My point is that if you tell people, okay, as a police officer, there's certain facts and information we retain from cases. We just don't tell anybody. There's cases about Polly's case. I could tell her now. I won't until I work with her. I just won't, because I don't want to influence her in any way, shape, or form. And because she's very truthful and very honest, and she deserves to know the whole story, not part of it or whatever the aliens left with her. Anyway, so we leave that information out because in my last event when I was 17, 5 beings showed up in my room in Alamogordo, New Mexico. Those beings were not aliens. They were the ones who made, hatched, cloned, or manufactured the alien.
The puppet masters of the puppets.
And they were not friendly. They were not there to say hello or anything like that. And then I was mentioning this on Art Bell one time, and he said, well, tell us all about it. And I said, I'd never do that. I've never described them. And then, of course, we had people come on and say, oh, I have had the same exact experience. And they're long, beautiful beings with long, beautiful white hair, and they are in white robes sitting at the big table. I said, you've been watching too much Star Trek. You don't know what you're talking
Yeah.
about. I assure you, they're nothing like that. Not in any sense of the word. I said, so you don't know what you're talking about. You're making it up or lying, and I don't know which. So I've never met you, so I'll just leave it at that. But that's the reason you don't tell people. Now, I have met 8 people in my life who have met one of these 5 beings that showed up. Let me give you a quick thumbnail of what it's like. I'm in California at a conference speaking, and a really the guy looks like a football player. He's very athletic, a black guy, and he's avoided me the whole conference. He walked clean around me, wouldn't come anywhere near my stand where I had all my implants and everything else. He avoided me for 3 days. Last day, I'm loading up, putting everything in boxes and loading up and getting ready to fly out. And he walks up and says, "Mr. Sims?" I looked at him and said, "Yes, sir." I said, "You've avoided me for 3 days." And he said, "I have." I said, you okay. What's your question? He said, "I'm going to draw a picture." And I gave him a pen and a piece of paper, and he started drawing a picture. It was a picture of that one of the entities that no one knows about. And when he drew that picture, he drew the first half of it. I took the pen out of his hand and finished it. He said, "I want to know if you've ever seen one of these." And I finished drawing the other half of it. And here's what he said. Hand of God, true story. "Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God." And he ran away. Because the dream he had wasn't a dream. It's real.
You
They
confirmed
ain't friendly. Well, he's one of 8 people. One of the other people has got ended up with grand mal epilepsy. The other person was an absolutely beautiful woman, one of the prettiest women I've ever seen. And when you talk to her about her event, her face contorts like, have you ever seen somebody touch an electrical wire and the muscles in the face like that?
Oh, yeah.
She goes from that beautiful to that ugly that quick. And nobody could do anything with her, so they called me, and I said, "Sure, I'll take care of it." And I said, "Would you like me to fix that?" And she said, "He told me I was ugly and I would always be ugly." And I said, "Well, you're actually quite beautiful, and everybody knows that." And she said, "No, I'm not." And that was the memory he left with her to destroy her. Anyway, I went ahead and fixed the problem, and then that went away, and so on. But my son was at 6 years old, he met one of those 5. And it just destroyed his life. It still is to this day. Those guys are not the alien. If there was an alien, they would be it. Because the guys we're looking at, they're poor examples of what an alien's supposed to be. These guys don't even act like an alien from another world. Half the time they can't even get their clothes on right.
What's the difference between an implant and a mark? Why sometimes they leave marks?
Good question. Marks fall into several categories. The marks can be from a scratch. They can be from needle points. So when we find people that have 3 little triangular marks, like 3 needle holes on their arm, as an example, I'll tell them, get a black light and check it. Get you a special light and check it and see if it fluoresces. See if it glows a fluorescence. Because sometimes if it's really an alien needle, they've injected something in you, it'll often glow under fluorescent, under a black light. And when it does that, it gives you a hint of what they may be doing. So that's where some of the needle marks come from. There are different kinds of marks. There's a guy that wrote me one time and sent me this picture of this horrific claw marks on his arm. He said a reptile grabbed him, and anyway, he went into a long story about it. And I looked at it, and And I'm convinced of his story that, in fact, it was a reptile that got him. The point is that those marks are from contact, physical contact.
Okay.
Sometimes you'll find triangular shapes on bruisings on people. Sometimes you'll find they'll be red, or sometimes, like in Tim's case, there can be a rectangular missing part of skin like that. Sometimes
I was personally left a mark that looks pretty much alike like Terry Lovelace's mark. It looks like maybe a cat paw, like a flower arrangement. That's my picture. That's my mark.
Mm-hmm. There's two primary kinds of bruisings or marks that appear on people. One are from casual contact, which is like when something grabs your arm and leaves bruising or leaves finger marks on your arms or legs. And another one is, some of them are, we call the second group procedural marks. That's a good example there. Procedural marks are done with a piece of equipment, and those are different. The biggest one that people are more familiar with is a thing called a scoop mark. When I was right after my abduction, the next night, I had this big scoop on my shin, but no scab whatsoever. And I couldn't figure out, well, how in the world did that happen? There's no scab, because kids, when they get a scab, they pick at it. They pull, kids are.
Yep.
And there was never any scab, but there was this. I've still got it to this day. It's about 5/8 as big as my thumb on my shin, and it's impressed into the skin, and that's often referred to as a scoop mark. Some people call them, they're taking dermatological scoop marks to check our DNA. Well, the best information I have is that that's the wrong answer. The best answer I can give is when we had and this is a question Tim asked, in the first, those implants we found inside the woman, the 3 that were inside the woman and 1 in the man's hand, those were, I took the biology of those to a pathologist the next morning. And 2 doctors were with me, and the pathologist looked at it and he says, "Oh, that's just a inflammatory process. Whenever you've got a foreign object in your body, the cells will gather together, and it's an inflammatory process, either chronic or acute." And I said, "Obviously, you know a lot more than I'll ever know, and but since I don't know everything, and you know a lot more than I do, because I knew he was wrong, I said, would you look at it under the microscope and tell me what you see?" And he did, and he says, "Oh, okay." He says, "Oh my God, those are non-inflammatory." What? How could that's impossible? "Where did you find this?" I said, "Around this metal object that was deep inside the body next to the bone." "That's impossible." That's what I love to hear doctors say. "It's impossible. That can't happen." That's a non-inflammatory. He said, "That's keratin. You know what keratin is?" I said, "Yes, sir. It's surface skin, fingernails, or hair." He said, "That doesn't grow deep inside the body, and it doesn't surround a foreign object. That'll never happen." But it did. It did. That's the whole point.
Yeah.
That's why the biology is important.
Yeah.
It is. It is.
And you said in a past interview that some of the implants that you found were of meteorites.
Yes.
Meteorite material.
The first implant we removed from that woman and from the man were meteoric in origin, and we've had these scientifically studied in the Mexico Tech and Los Alamos laboratories. I've got very long reports about them. In a nutshell, it said, of course, they asked the same question, and I didn't tell them anything until the whole testing was over, and all the scientists there were mortified at the answer. Um, they said, well, the metal is a rare meteorite from the Yaochung or the Widmanstatten structure meteorite. These are very rare. They're needle-like formations, about a quarter-inch long. And where in the world did you get them? They're very rare. You can't go find these things. And I laughed and I said they were. Later, we finally told them. I said they were wrapped in a keratinous material in a biological cocoon, so the body would not recognize it because it's your own biology.
Right. So your immune system wouldn't attack it.
You would never know it. Unless you found it and had it checked, you would never, ever know.
We talk about the generational side of this phenomenon with our parents or even our kids. Was it generational with you, and are implants generational?
The implants are not generational. Again, they're very rare. And I know everybody thinks that's probably not true, but it is. The mental apps are very, very real, and they're much more prolific than we have any idea. But the bottom line about the implant, the generational aspect, is that my son was an abductee, and how we found out about all this is I never told my wife about my abductions. Then one day when my son was 6 years old, I woke up about 2:30 in the morning, and I mean, woke up wasn't even the right word, switched on. I knew they were there. I knew they were in our home. And I ran as fast as I could down the hallway, and I went past my son's room because I knew he wasn't in his room. I knew he wasn't there. And my daughter, I knew she was there. And so I went into the dining room area, and there was my son standing there in a deep trance, looking out the back window, the back screen, the back glass door. And I watched him for a long time, and I said, what are you looking at, David? And he said, the little red light. And of course I realized that's a screen. There is no red light out there, and they've already gone. So I told him, go back to your room and go to sleep. And my wife walks up at this time, looks at him, looks at me, looks at him, looks at me, and says, what's going on? So I had to tell her what really happened, and that our son's one of them. He's an abductee too. She's a remarkable woman, and I mean that literally. It was she's a remarkable person. She took it really well, and but it is just the event wasn't just an abduction. The event was with one of the entities I told you about, one of the 5 that came after me the last night when I was 17. And it has just destroyed my son's life.
That's too bad.
I'm so sorry to hear.
Yeah.
Since you are a qualified hypnotherapist, is there any way you can help your son with that?
Well, first of all, he's in another state, and the answer is yes. If people want help, if they can get past their own
Programming,
that's a good term. If they can do that, then there's a good. I've helped people with some really remarkable things, but in his case, he just said, I can handle it. I can do it. I said, you can't. You don't know what to do. You have no idea who came for you. You're still so stupid. And I just tell him the truth. You're still so stupid. You think it was the alien. I said they were just the excuse. The one that came for you was someone totally different.
How did it make you feel knowing that they made your boy go through this experience and that it was not a nice experience for him, to the point that it really destroyed his life as you describe it? How do you feel as a father?
Well, I'll tell you the rest of the story in brief. The next night, my son designed a crossbow with a large broadhead arrow. That's a huge arrow point like that. Aimed it at his door. So if anybody had opened the door, the arrow would have shot them. He was waiting for them the next night. But if his sister had opened the door, or me, or his mother, would have gotten shot. Yeah. That's how real his event was. And I was taking him to school the next day, walking him out to the bus, and he looked at me, 6 years old, and said the following statement. He said, "Dad, I no longer care for people like I used to after that event." And that just broke my heart, because he was a protector. He loves helping people. He loves taking care of people, etc. But anyway,
did that make you angry at the aliens that they did that to your boy?
No, the alien was just a tool. They're just part of the show. The ones that came, the one particular, like I said, the real people that met these particular entities, you're not going to be the same after that. It's not like an abduction. It's not.
Could they be relegated to the demonic?
Once again, please.
Could they be relegated to the demonic realm?
Well, this is one of the big questions that no one, when I say no one, very few people talk about on air, and that is they never ask the big question: who are the guys that showed up in your room when you were 17?
Right.
No, they're not aliens, I guarantee you. I said the best way for me to describe them and I said, and the problem is when I tell you about it, people have their own filters in their right. head, and so they're right. going to filter it the way they want to filter it.
Right.
But I was there, so I think I know more about what that is. So the bottom line is there was a book written years ago by Zachariah Sitchin, and he says, the gods came down from the skies. And I read that, and I said, either this guy doesn't know Sumerian or ancient Hebrew, or he's lying to people.
Right.
Because that's not what it says in Hebrew.
Right.
And the story is they got kicked out of heaven.
Right.
And that's who you're dealing with. That's not the alien. That's the ones who hatched, cloned, made, and manufactured them. And they're a bad bunch of guys. So they're good fallen angels and bad ones. They've done some very bad things.
And actually, we are hearing in Brazil the
yes.
phenomenon. People
yes.
are relating it very much to demonic stuff. These orbs running, people are running from these orbs.
Sure.
In fact, people were killed in Brazil from these.
Yeah, in Colares and other places, yes.
Yeah.
Colares. I have some people say, well, why don't you talk about this? Because first of all, I didn't sell. If I wrote a book on alien and human mutilations, I guarantee you that 3 people wouldn't buy it. It'd be 3 people to buy it at the most. My point is, someone's telling me, well, you're just that's just your point of view. I said, no. I said, I said, you want me to show you? I said, I only do presentations like this for doctors and people who are trained in the field, and they don't want to see it. I said, when you see a woman skinned alive in her own bed without a drop of blood anywhere on the sheets,
Right.
and or you said 2 dead children in Dallas, Texas, dead from their abduction. I said, you don't have a clue. I said, I can show you evidence. There's so little really good information about this sort of thing in the UFO field. People don't know this. Case in point, and I'll have to close this pretty quick.
Okay.
But a doctor, a friend of mine who's a police officer who studied cattle mutilations back in the 1990s, he was buying me dinner at a restaurant in San Francisco, and he said, I want to know what you know about cattle mutilations. I said, well, good night, man. You're the expert. Why in the world would you ask me a question like that? And he's a good cop. He said, I want to know what you know about cattle mutilations. I said, I just stuff I read. I don't know much more than, I want to know what you know about cattle mutilations. Really pressed me. And I said, all right. I said, there are at least 3 different kinds. What? I said, the kinds that they do. And he said, who's they? I said, the ones who you don't want to talk about. I said, they do mutes. And I said, then there's the mutilations that we do. And he said, who's we? I said, the intelligence community.
Mm-hmm.
He said, who's the other ones? I said, the third group, I think, are much rarer, but they're people who want to make contact with the alien, and they'll do anything to do that.
Right.
And they think if they mutilate a cow or a horse or something like that, that the aliens will say, oh my goodness, you're just like us. We'll just come down and visit you. I said,
Or they will open.
are you going to get a
portals.
surprise?
Right. Yeah.
So I said, and I said, but I said the precision of each one of them are tell you a lot about who did what. As you can tell who did what if you look at the medical aspects of each one of them. And I said, but I suspect your cattle glow in the dark. And I'll tell you, I thought he was going to have a heart attack. What are you talking about? And I said, well, I think your cattle have been pre-marked. What do you mean? I said, the cattle you've been studied have been marked with a fluorescent mark before they got mutilated. How do you know that? I said, well, I used to be a cop. I'm not stupid,
Right.
I never told anybody about that. I said, that doesn't mean anything to me. It just means you've got a leak in your information, and I got it. I said, that's okay. My cattle have marks on them too. He said, are you talking about abductees? I said, yeah. I said, there's no difference. And he says, what do you mean? I said, the fluorescence on our abductees. He said, are you saying there are different kinds of fluorescence? I said, yeah, it depends on whether it's procedure or whether it's physical contact, like the bruises you see on people. If you'll get a black light when it first happens, you'll often, if it's alien related, you'll actually see a fluorescence there in most cases. And you can't get it off. You can't wash it off. It won't come off. It'll disappear in a few days. I said, the second thing is some of the marks that we have on these abductees are procedural, and it'll show equipment or different types of things, very similar to the physical marks, but you'll only see it in fluorescence. I said, we've got whole presentations I could show you. It's just unbelievable, absolutely amazing stuff. And I said, my point is that our cattle glow in the dark too. And the fluorescence that we have on these people, it's quite remarkable. So anyway, and we kept a lot of that private too, because like as soon as I told about fluorescence when I was in Italy, next thing I got was this woman had fluorescence all over her face and arms and everywhere, and implants all over her body. And well, they made the whole thing up. Not one word of it was true. Not one word of it. I said, first of all, fluorescence is wrong color. I said, why do you think I didn't tell you? Because I knew you were going to do this stuff. You're going to go out and fake it, and that's okay. Now I know who not to talk to when I come back to Italy. And you're it. So,
And what color is the fluorescence? Is it green or is it orange?
well, it's different colors. It depends on what it's for. It depends on what happened.
Right.
Mm.
And green was one of the most common. It's a bright fluorescent green. It'll, it'll be above 267 nanometers. So all of that's important. It's not just that you have a mark. I mean, a lady was at one of my workshops one time and said, "Oh my God, I've got fluorescence all over me. Look at this. Oh my God." And I looked at her and said, older lady, and I said, "Okay." I said, "Look, well, before we run away from here, why don't we just think about this for a minute?" I said, "Young lady," I said, "well, I study UFOs all the time." I said, "That doesn't mean that you get to have fluorescence on you just because you like UFOs." I said, "Do you play what was the game?" I said, "Do you play?" This is so funny. Uh, Bingo. She said, "Yeah." I said, "Did you play bingo this week?" She said, "Yeah, last night." And I took the little water and washed the fluorescence off of her. I said, "That's that green magic marker you were using."
Yeah, the dauber.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's,
That's
oh,
funny.
okay. Can't get this stuff off. The first time we found fluorescence on a lady was on the inside of her arm, and it had a Mandelbrot set, a mathematical construction of order and chaos, fractal geometry on the inside of her arm. And she said, "What the hell is that?" And I said, "I don't know. I just suspected we might find something, and that's why I'm checking you with a black light." She ran to the bathroom and started scrubbing, and the more she scrubbed, the more she cried. She reminded me of a rape victim.
Wow.
You can wash as much as you want, but you're not going to make that go away.
We have a question from the chat, and Sarah's going to ask it.
This is how many languages do you speak?
Once again?
Chance wants to know how many languages do you speak?
Well, I've lived in Japan and a little bit, and I lived in Korea for a year, so I speak enough to eat in those two places. And I speak a small amount of Spanish. My wife speaks a lot more than I do. And I speak mostly Bocce and English. And I pretty much mess up English. I speak Bocce better than English.
Yeah, I call it Surinese when I talk.
Chance also was asking any other worldly languages.
No, the fact is that the alien entities that we're talking about, it doesn't matter whether you're Chinese, Japanese, or any other race. It doesn't matter. You're going to hear it in your own language. It's going to be that clear to you.
Sometimes you hear it in your own voice.
It's usually it's a different voice. You definitely know it's them. When I had my first event as a kid, I knew there's something wrong. I could hear him talking in my head, and it didn't sound like my voice in my head. When I'm talking to myself, I know what I sound like. When he's talking in my head, he sounds different than I do. So that didn't work at all. I knew something was seriously wrong. This was not a dream. This was a nightmare is what it was.
So let's go down the panel and have last questions for Darrell.
Sure.
Polly?
Mr. Darrell, thank you so much for your time and for addressing also my emails. You are just amazing with this amount of information and knowledge, and this is really an honor. My last question for you will be, what is disclosure for you, whatever that means?
Disclosure, if we think in terms of disclosure from the government, it's never going to happen. Forget it. They're never going to give that up. And all these whistleblowers and stuff, you've got the wrong people asking the wrong questions, and these Congress doesn't have the right kind of. I'm sitting here telling you things about the alien you may or may not know. Some things you may know. The people in Congress don't have a clue. They don't know how to ask these questions. I told my wife one night, we're watching this guy who was an Air Force pilot who had seen the UFO on one of the Tic Tacs. And he was on a show later, and he was real silent, sitting by himself. And I told my wife, I laughed. I said, he's an abductee. She said, now, how do you know that? I said, you just watch. 2 shows later, he went from depressed and upset to, I've met them. I know what they're really like. And I have a child. And they showed me my child and all that. He went from an abductee to a contactee overnight.
Oh.
He doesn't have a clue. The question is, which one would you rather have, a positive experience or a negative one? Well, he chose the positive. Right. Doesn't matter if it's real or not. It only matters that it's
I choose the truth because I can deal with the truth. I cannot deal with what I can't know about, right? I need to know the truth.
That's where I'm at. I got to have the truth. I don't care how bad it is. I don't care how good it is.
Yeah,
I want to know what it is.
Tell me the truth.
That's why I started UFO Man, because I had an event in Chatfield, Minnesota, where I was sleeping on the couch, and my girlfriend woke up in the middle of the night and turned on our big 27-inch analog TV set. And she said there was a hooded thing blocking the TV halfway. And it started floating toward me. It wasn't walking, it was gliding or floating. She said she tried to move, she could not.
Right.
She said she could only move her eyes. Mm-hmm. And she said she saw what looked like a tail pushing out the back end of the robe. And at first, she could not see any hands. She could not see the face, but it was moving toward where I was sleeping, and she fell asleep.
Yes.
When I woke up in the morning, my clothes were on inside out and wrong side too, and I didn't go to bed that way.
Right.
And I had 3 bruises on top of each knee, like they were impact bruises, like somebody was holding me down really hard.
Right.
Later, about a month later, I questioned her again about the encounter. And I said, did you see the hands? She said, I finally recalled that. She said they were scaly with long nails. And there were 3 fingers.
Yep.
She thinks it was a reptilian that was in our house.
That's entirely possible. And the fact is that whenever you have these events, any of you people on the listening tonight, if you have these events, get yourself a black light and check yourself from time to time. And if you see coloration and everything, wash it and see if you can get it off. If it won't come off, it won't, and you can still see it with a black light, photograph it, film it, and send it to me. And those that would like to write me, I answer all my emails. If you have any questions you would like to write about or ask and everything, I'll be glad to talk to you. If I don't answer, it's not because I don't want to, it's because I didn't get the email. So if it gets through to me, I answer it. I answer all of them.
Right. We have his personal business information with his email and his phone number on it. And I'm going to post it up right now. When no one else can help, DERREL SIMS, private investigator. Investigate potential partners, general background checks, real estate, insurance, and attorney, private investigation services, handwriting analysis, and forgeries. He's a veteran and ex-bodyguard for dignitaries, ex-military police senior officer, ex-fugitive recovery agent. current former associations, Military Intelligence Corps Association, Certified Hypnotherapist, CMHT, RHA, former Intelligence Officers Association, and a VFW member. Also, this is his phone number, and he can be contacted at DERREL.WSIMS@mac.com. There's also another email. I don't know if you want us to give it out, Daryl.
Yep, mac.com or me.com. Either one will work. It doesn't matter.
Houston, serving all of Texas, 30 plus years of experience. He does have one book available on Amazon at this time, which is Alien Hunter, The Evidence in Light by Daryl W. Sims with Patricia Gray. If you're interested in it, pick it up. Sounds like a good book. It's also available on Kindle. I know that you said before the show that you had some other books that are available, but you're working out some type of glitch with a website.
Yeah, on our website, alienhunter.org, we have another book. It's a book on implants. And again, if you're interested, just write me, and I'll tell you all about it. And I don't hawk stuff because I just don't care.
Right.
Only reason I wrote books to begin with because someone said, you should write a book. You know, you got all this information. You're not. What if you die? Then where's your information then? You know. So I said, well, okay, I'll write a book.
Good point.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Okay.
I'm writing a lot of other stuff, but I just hadn't put it in the book yet. But I have a lot of great stuff I'm working on.
Sarah, we have your last question.
I thought I already asked it. Okay. Well, anyways, I just want to personally thank you for the information you gave to me backstage and stuff too. That was helpful. I think it's pretty cool that you are so into this, but you're like, I love how you don't tell everybody everything, so you can fact check them when they come up to you. Like, I love that. It's very, very good. There's lots more credibility to you and the things you do and stuff. So I want to thank you for that too. So,
well, I want to give you one quick little hit on that. Terry Lovelace, I broke his case in 2016, I think it was, here in Houston. But anyway, later I took him out to a TV shoot out in California, and had him. We had him there asking all kinds of questions and everything, and then they said, "Would you? How do you know he's telling the truth?" And I said, "Well, he's got a lot to lose. He's got a good credibility as an attorney and all that." And I said, "He's telling the truth for a lot of reasons." I said, "But anyway, one of the things he brought up, and he brought up about this woman. We have a woman in black type thing." And I showed him. I showed a picture to them of a drawing he made under hypnosis and one out of hypnosis, and of this woman. And then later, after I talked about holding the information back, then after he did all that, in other words, he had showed his hand, so to speak, and told the truth the best he remembered of his events. Then I showed him a picture of the Wib, the woman in black, and he said, "Oh my God, that's her! Oh, it's unbelievable!" And I laughed and laughed and laughed, and I said, "He said, where did you get that?" And I said, "We've seen her around Houston, over 25 years ago."
What?
And I said, "You're just now seeing her up in Dallas." I said, "She drives a red Escort. It's dented up because she's not a good driver." And I said, the interesting thing is that she's visiting you now. And I said, I ran the plates on the red Escort, and they're stolen out of Dallas, Texas, where you live.
Wow.
He was freaking out completely. He said, "I can't believe it's." I said, "You're not the only one that's seen her." I said, "She's been around for a while."
Wow.
We could do a whole night on that woman. Unbelievable.
Hey, Daryl, I got to tell you this. we would love to have you back again sometime to talk further about what you know.
Good. Sounds like a winner.
And we will follow up with Polly and maybe get more information from her to talk about with you as well. Sarah seems to be a recent abductee and may have been an abductee when she was younger because she has an incident where she fell asleep and woke up in her backyard in a barbed wire fence.
Well, not in the backyard. It's the field behind the backyard. I went to bed in my bed, and to get to where I was at in the field, I would have either had to walk through the backyard, which was just dirt and stuff. It's like a half acre, and then it goes steep down a hill, and there's a ditch there full of tumbleweeds, then a 6-foot fence to climb up and over. Right.
Right.
So either I did that in my sleep, or I walked around the block. Through like construction sites and old farm stuff, and then the field, and I was like miles away to go all the way back around, right? So yeah, when I woke up in the field, then I had like some barbed wire, razor wire, whatever it was, in the arm right here, right? Like I even got a scar from it still, right?
Right.
And yeah, I was like, oh, this isn't good. I have to get up and get to school like soon, and I'm out here covered in mud, right? So then I had to find out where I was at by figuring it out, like just sitting looking, and then I had to take off through the field. The closest way now was to go through the field, up the hill, and then kick the board down on the fence. Then go up the hill. She had to climb onto the fence to go like that because there's no footpath or anything down there, right? And it was ice plant. So anyway,
sometimes they don't drop us off in the same location they picked us up in.
It's like, did I punch him? I mean, I had surgery one time, and when I woke up from the anesthesia, I punched the doctor the first thing I did.
Right.
Right? And I was like, why did I do that? I don't know, but I felt like I had to.
Probably another doctor you were thinking about.
I guess. But that was the only time I ever had surgery, right? So.
Right.
But at the end of the day, I have no idea about that experience. I don't know why I was there. I never told anybody because I don't want to get in trouble. And, I had a history of sleepwalking to begin with. So who knows?
I do need to tell you, Darrell, that in the interview we had back in 2022, you were talking about a round welt on a man's body that had pinpoint puncture wounds in a circle, and that it was like the size of a silver dollar, I think you said.
Yeah.
I have a smaller one in just below my sternum that I got on January 1st, 2009. And I've had it ever since. And it was a welt, but it was probably the size of the tip of your pointer finger.
Mm-hmm.
And it had 4 to 5 puncture wounds in a circle.
Yeah.
Now when I found it, it was itching because I have very sensitive skin. So I was itching it. It was bleeding because I was itching it so hard. Mm-hmm. I still have it to this day. It's 2025. So I've had it, 16 years? And it has not gone away.
Well, send me some pictures of those things we talked about and those bruisings, marks, and we'll look at them and give you an idea of what we think about them.
Okay, we'll do. Well, thanks to everybody who watched online, and thanks to everybody who participated in the chat room. And we want to thank Darrell SIMS for coming here again. We would like to have you back, sir. You're a friend of the UFO Man team, and you are part of our family.
Thank you so much. You guys have a great one.
Thank you so much.
All right. Goodbye and good night. We'll see you next week, everyone.
Good night.